Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Chasing Hazel's Tales, a family history podcast. If you haven't heard Hazel's story, I invite you to check out our entire episode list. Some of the best stories are waiting to be told, and they could come from your family history. Today is a great episode. I'm excited, so buckle up and grab some tea. I'm Kim McLaughlin.
And I'm Laura Ireland. And we are very excited today to have a special guest join us who might know something about the Nicolai story. We have the granddaughter of Salvatore and Ruth Nicolai, Lisa Goodwin.
Thank you for inviting me to share our family memories today.
All right, you're on. We're going to be picking your brain. So just to catch up, last week we caught up with Hazel. This week we have nothing more to report, but that's odd because we usually have lots to report, but today we don't. But we keep a spot open every week just in case we find out something about Hazel, but not today. But we want you to recall that Salvatore Nicolai from Montefiascone, Italy, immigrated to the United States in 1912, fell in love with Ruth Broad from New Brunswick, Canada, while they were both working in Boston or in the Boston area. I think we could say they were both the adventurous type, hardworking, and willing to take risks to better their lives.
I think that sounds like a pretty safe bet.
Yeah.
And so we recounted the sad facts about Salvatore and Ruth both passing at a very young age, leaving their 4 children as orphans in Canada, where they held no citizenship, and one daughter, Marilyn, to be raised by her father in New Brunswick. So Philip, Rosella, Ruth, and Sylvia then crossed the border into Maine, where their mother's sister, Irma Broad Kinney, took them in and raised them with her own 3 children on the Kinney farm. The Nicolai children endeavored to persevere, and they did that well. We now have the Nicolai children grown up to adulthood with families of their own. And there's a lot of pictures that have been posted on Instagram and Facebook, and you should check those out. They're really great.
And right, they're awesome. They were beautiful people.
Yes,
pictures.
for sure.
So lucky to have them. So we do have a correction regarding Marilyn. I said last week that it is true that Marilyn was never able to come to the United States because of her citizenship, but she was not raised by her father when she was left behind. She was raised by a family called the Browns, who were relatives of the Kinneys. Little else is really known except that she ended up living in Western Canada. And so this part of the story remains a little bit unfair, but it makes me think of Hazel because she was the youngest and was adopted out as an infant, as the baby of the family. And Hazel was also separated from her siblings.
Yeah, pretty common theme there, huh?
I think it was. Whenever there was a baby, it's like a hot potato, like you needed a family to raise them.
So, Lisa, what do you know of any reunions between the siblings? Did they ever reunite?
Oh, yes, I did. I believe they saw each other rarely as children because they didn't do a lot of traveling back and forth back then. I don't remember Marilyn being around when we were growing up. My first recollection of her was in my early 20s when she and her husband Doug came to visit my mother in Lincoln. She was living in Manitoba, Canada. Marilyn and John Brown, who was the son of the couple who raised her, came to my wedding. And I have a tablecloth that she gave me, and I still have it to this day.
Oh, nice.
Was
it handmade or a family
No,
heirloom?
it was lacy. It wasn't handmade. It was store-bought, but
yeah.
I still have it.
Yeah.
It's the only thing I have from her. I don't know of many other times they got together. Mom and Marilyn did talk often on the phone after I was married and until Marilyn passed.
Yeah. Oh. So that's interesting. And I'd just like to give some thought about what the Nicolai children remember about their parents and what might be passed down as traits or mannerisms. But I always wonder, is there something in their DNA that drives their habits or their resilience? And I wander into nerd territory all the time. Sooner or later I come back, and I'm back now. But that was kind of my question that I wanted to ask everybody. Did their parents have any recollections, and could they connect them to the generation now? But anyway, we'll let Laura carry on.
Okay. So first we have Philip Nicolai, who created the timeline that we use to see when and where the family moved. And his 3 children don't recall much, just the basic story. With Philip being the oldest, he would have had the most memory of the early family life. And they remember the family story just as the other cousins do. And from Rosella's family, Linda says, I do remember Aunt Sib saying she remembered sitting on her dad Salvatore's lap, like bouncing on his knee like you do as a little one.
Yeah. And so I contacted Sylvia's daughter, Dee Dee, and she said, as far as memory goes, she can remember that her mom would tell us how her mother would gather the children during thunderstorms and lightning storms and pray together. And that she said, I'm sure as a single mother, there was times of fear that the house could be struck by lightning and catch fire. And I think my mom showed that she was like her dad in that she stepped out and took initiative to search out the family in Italy and then travel there to meet them. She was brave and adventurous. She also left her childhood home and went to the big town of Portland to make a life for herself and hopefully meet a nice man to marry, which she did. Sylvia was a special lady.
You know, I remember Mom telling us about the lightning storms too. And when we were kids, Mom never let us, or we never could go outside, of course, but she wouldn't even let us stand by the windows and watch. We always had to be inside. So that kind of was passed on from her
Right,
mother.
right.
But some other thoughts about Mom. She didn't remember much about her dad. She was only 2 years old, of course, when he passed. She did say she remembered sitting on his lap like Sylvia did. She also said she could remember rooms in the house where they lived in Massachusetts. I think that's kind of interesting because she was so young to remember those things.
Mm-hmm.
The family's life was tough after her father died. Our grandmother took the kids back to New Brunswick, and she went back and lived with her dad. I believe they were doing okay financially when they were in Massachusetts because they had a nice home. And even to this day, it's a nice looking home.
Right.
And Grampy's headstone was very nice. It was high quality. So I think it was a big change when they went back to Canada because then they went from having things to not having anything.
Right.
So their life changed a lot. I can remember Mom telling me that they mostly ate pancakes. So they didn't have a lot of money for food. They didn't have shoes in the summer and they got a pair of shoes for the winter. Dirt poor is a good description, I think, of how they lived when they went back to Canada. Our grandmother earned money cleaning. She cleaned homes. When she married Edward Kearney, who was much, much older than her in 1929, her occupation was listed as a housemaid. My sister told me she also cleaned the dance hall and assumes that may be where she met James Jackson, her third husband, Marilyn's father. So Salvatore died in June of 1928, and she married Kearney in October of 1929. So it was probably a forced marriage of some sort to provide for her children. I'm sure there was a lot of pressure from her relatives to get married, and this gentleman was widowed and was available. So I think she kind of got pushed into that. And just as an aside, I just wonder what their lives would have been like had our grandmother been able to contact the Italian family. You know, her life just seemed so sad out after Salvatore passed, or what transpired in it.
Yeah.
And it sounded so nice before, they had such a good life. It sounded like so hard to lose him. I can't imagine.
Yeah, it was 4 little kids.
She would have been very, very busy with 4 little children.
Absolutely.
To think about translating anything into Italian to get any information or find them would have been almost, especially in rural Canada. Who's going to help her in rural Canada? So totally understandable. Although I bet she thought about it.
Oh, I bet she did. But my mom remembers her mother as being happy and outgoing. So if she was really sad, she was able to hide that some from her children. She had to have been adventurous, to take off and go to Massachusetts as a young lady in the 1920s. Probably scandalous to the primitive Baptist. She was surrounded by a New Brunswick. Just think about it.
Yeah.
This young unmarried woman takes off for the big city of Boston.
Big city Boston. And I think the primitive Baptists were very conservative.
Yes, they were.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm sure marrying a Catholic was frowned upon also in her circle of family.
All good points.
Do you know, did she convert to Catholicism or did they just coexist?
I think they just coexisted. They didn't
Yep.
get married in the Catholic Church.
Okay.
And I think it was either her marriage certificate or her death certificate, it said that she was Baptist.
Oh,
So
okay.
she did not convert.
Okay.
But interestingly, the Protestant Catholic unity was also a bit of an issue for my father's parents.
Right.
And as it turned out, for my parents.
Yeah.
But that's a story for another day.
That's another story, but it's okay. That one's cool.
Yes, it's interesting to me.
Yeah.
But when mom's mother died, the children were never allowed to view her body. Can you imagine these little children never getting to say goodbye to their mother? They were also not allowed to keep any of her possessions, as it would not be proper, whatever that means. Seems pretty cruel to me.
Yeah, it does now for sure.
Well, it
Yeah.
sounds silly. Like, where did it go? What do you do? Just throw it in the dump?
Yeah,
No,
it
you
just
can't have this. We're going to throw it in the dump. Or did someone secretly take it away and say, hey, I really like this stuff. But, I mean, I don't know. That just sounds odd.
yeah, just a handkerchief, one of her handkerchiefs that she
Right.
Right.
Anything.
Something.
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
remember her by.
Yep.
But she said in her adult life, she could feel her mother's presence around her, especially when she was sitting quietly. So I think her mom's spirit always stayed with them and guided them.
Yep.
My mother had a super sense of family. I think this stemmed from not having her parents most of her life. I think she did subconsciously remember her mother's mannerisms and maybe emulated some of that as a mother, because my mother was a wonderful mother.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how hard it must have been to not have a mother to ask simple questions about how to do things in life.
Right.
What if your baby is colicky? What do you do?
Right.
She didn't have her mother to ask those questions.
Right.
So my mom worked hard and didn't know the word can't do. I believe as a child, she watched her mother work hard to provide, and then she emulated that.
Right. I agree.
Mm-hmm.
That seems right.
Yeah. Yeah, Kim, you know my mom,
Yeah.
how hard a worker she was, and she could do anything
Yeah.
from hanging sheetrock to changing toilets.
To making a wedding dress.
Yes, and making a wedding dress. Oh, and you want a quilt? Here's one.
Yeah.
You could just do anything. Her and her siblings never exchanged harsh words, if you can believe that. I mean, siblings fight,
Right.
but they did not. They had a very special bond. They looked out for one another. When me and my siblings would have spats, she would work hard to make sure that we kissed and made up, so to speak, especially when we became adults. I mean, she would say, if I had a fight with my sister, you need to make up with your sister. And she would hound me until I did it. But now I understand more of why she did that. Family was her life.
Right.
And
when you look back, I think when you look back at her history, that's where the understanding comes from.
Right.
When you see how she lived and all the events that turned in her time, how that shapes how she behaves in the rest of her life. Do you agree? I don't know.
Oh, absolutely. Now that I'm an adult and I can look back at her history, I can understand. And having talked to her about her feelings growing up, I can understand all of that much, much better.
Mm-hmm.
And before she passed, she made me promise not to let her family splinter.
Yep.
Now, that was one of her biggest fears. And at the time, I thought, sure, Mom, I can do that. Well, in my family tree, there's a lot of people.
Yeah.
So now that I've put that into practice, I can look back and say, I had no idea how difficult it was going to be to hurt all those cats.
Hurting cats, big time.
Yeah, it is. And even to take a picture with that family now is like hurting cats.
There's always the stragglers, the ones that you just have to come on.
Yeah. And, being wards of the state, as they were called, it did have an effect on each one of them's children. They worked hard on the farm and were grateful that they were able to stay together and not get split up into families, God knows where.
Right.
Because that very well could have happened to them.
It could have.
Aunt not stepped up and said, I'm going to keep my sister's children. It wasn't until well into adulthood that they started openly talking about their lives, the hardships and the hurts they had all borne through their life. And, I can remember sitting and listening to them. I'm
Yeah.
not going to repeat some of those hurts, but
Yeah.
they had a lot of adult therapy talking to each other.
Right.
And Uncle Phil was the firstborn and the last to pass. He spoke to me after all of his sisters had passed about how much he missed all of them.
Yeah.
They had a deep love for one another, and you just don't always see that with siblings, especially nowadays. People take so much for granted.
And also what I notice is they all lived different areas. I mean, Philip lived in Virginia, and then you have Portland, and you have Penobscot County, and there's just a lot of distance. It's hard to stay that connected when you're that spread far apart.
Yes, it is, but they made sure that they did. And I know the Thanksgiving before my mom passed, I mean, she was adamant she was going to have all of her family together.
Yeah.
Uncle Phil couldn't make it, but the other extended families did make it, and
Mm-hmm.
it was really important to my mother. That just showed you how much family meant to her.
Right.
Yeah. So now we know that the 4 Nicolai children had very nearly 0 memories of their dad and only a few memories of their mom. And a few themes that run through the memories are that the children remember sitting on their dad's lap, having him bounce them like a dad would. And it seems like these memories seem loving, and we can say with some certainty that he loved his wife and was awfully good to her, as she wrote in her own words on the back of that picture.
Right.
The clues for Ruth Broad show a playful mom, loving wife, adventurous soul that was dealt a very hard blow when she lost her husband and then was forced to go back to Canada with her children. But she endeavored to persevere. These are traits that are now sprinkled through the descendants. Too many to note here at this time. But
many.
Again, nerd territory.
You're right.
It's a strong example, I think, of how nature can be as powerful or more so than nurture in some of these things. I've seen it in other people as well, not knowing the family members, but having a lot of similar traits. And these people sound like they have very, very strong adventure and perseverance and, so many good traits.
Yep. I agree. That's a DNA study just waiting to happen.
Yes.
And so one thing that makes this story interesting to me is, so you have these adults and they're loving siblings, but what do people do when they wish they knew more about their ancestors, whether it be a parent, a grandparent, or uncle, or someone fascinating or trying to connect? So what do? They go looking. And that's what kind of Laura and I did when we didn't know anything about our grandmother. We just said, well, we just started asking and looking. But lucky for us, Sylvia had that same inkling. She had that need to go look and to fill in the blanks, and she did a great job. And she blazed a trail for all of us to benefit from and follow. Hint, hint. We're just going to say that all roads lead to Rome, and this is where it gets good. So Sylvia had settled in Portland. There was a large Italian population, and Sylvia was friends with many. She had a lot of Italian connections down here. And we have the letters and an article from the Portland, Maine Evening Express, and we're going to share them with you. She gets advice and help from many along the way, and let's get this started. So from the article, I'll read just a little bit that sets up this story. And it's from, like I said, the Portland, Maine Evening Express from June 14th, 1971. This is written by Gertrude Cutler, and it's the title of the article is Sylvia Masterminds an Italian Reunion. So basically, it goes on to start out to say that Sylvia didn't know much about her paternal family. And so it says, the paternal side of her family tree was foggy until she found the grave of her father, Salvatore Nicolai, in Walpole, Mass. So he died in 1928 when Sylvia was less than a year old. And we know those details. But so Sylvia had little to go on when she decided to fill out that foggy family tree. The city records, helpful persons, and several trips to Walpole eventually gave her the first sight of her father's grave and a copy of his marriage certificate, which told her where he was born. And she said she probably would have stopped right there if it hadn't been for her good friends, Thomasina, who I think her last name was Marzilli, and Josephine Palomino of Congress Street. They can speak and write Italian and I can't, and they offered to help. So that was a big deal right there. So we'll have Laura go ahead and let us know what they wrote.
Okay, so I have the letter from Sylvia. It's dated January 10th of 1970, and she's writing to the mayor of the town where her father was born. And what is it, Montefiascone?
Yeah.
Is that too much emphasis?
Did you have Italian wine last night? Because if you have Italian wine, it just goes a lot easier.
All right, well, maybe I should have had more. All right, so Sylvia writes to him. She says, I, Sylvia Saunders, am the daughter of Salvatore Nicolai, who died when I was in infancy. I have accumulated all vital statistics about my father in this country and am interested in locating any immediate surviving relatives with whom I can get in contact. I've been advised to contact you by Dr. Domenico Santoro, the Italian consul in Portland, Maine. And, would you please pass this to the proper Bureau of Vital Statistics or advise me how to further proceed? And very truly yours, Mrs. Sylvia Saunders. So, and this is all, all done on paper, all sent via the mail, so different than any contacts we'd try to make today.
Right.
Email and whatnot, websites.
You're just throwing a letter out there and hope somebody reads it.
Right, yeah. So, and then the letter back to her, did I see it dated January 30th? Okay, so just 20 days after she dated her letter, she got a letter back. It says, Dear Madam, I have uncovered the accurate information requested by you in your letter of January 10th and am forwarding it to you. You have here at present, living and in good health, 2 aunts and 2 uncles, and it lists out the names of Maria Giuseppe Cesare.
Cesare.
Oh, Cesare.
I'm leaving that in.
You. All right, Cesare and Philomena, all with the last name Nicolai. And
just for note, those are the 4 remaining siblings. Because if you remember, Consalvo went to Argentina, Salvatore went to the United States, and the 4 remaining siblings that they just listed.
They were all still alive and well in 1970.
Right. Yep.
Okay. And he says, in closing, he says, I've given them your address in the US and they will contact you directly, hoping to have pleased you. And he signs it in a name I can't pronounce.
Does anybody want to give it a shot?
Regimildo del Monaco.
There you go. That's pretty good.
I don't know. It's a guess. But anyways, what a lovely response.
And it didn't take long.
No.
I mean, he wrote right back.
Yep, that was very nice.
So one thing I want to mention about the letter that Sylvia wrote to the mayor, one of the helpers told her to make sure that it was short and sweet and to the point, because if she used too much, she made the letter too long, they wouldn't answer. So it did seem like she just said, here I am, this is what I have, can you help me? That kind of thing. Because otherwise maybe no one would have ever read her letter, but that was the advice that she was given.
Well, apparently they were correct.
Right.
Yeah, it's very good advice. So I have some letters from the family back to Sylvia. And it's interesting to note that the first one was dated January 22nd, only 12 days after the date on Sylvia's. So They were super excited.
That's
super
very
excited.
Telling. I think that's very telling. Yeah.
Look how fast the mail used to be. Okay, so the first letter is from Aunt Philomena, and it's dated January 22nd, 1970. My dear niece, it was through the mayor that I heard from you. You could never imagine how happy I was to receive your letter. I hope you are all in the best of health as we are here in Italy. Therefore, I hope that with this letter, we have learned of your whereabouts that I desired for many years, with the hope that someday you could come and visit me and get acquainted with us all. I assure you that I shall tell the other aunt. I don't have anything else to say, so best wishes to you and all other relatives, your aunt, Philomena, and family.
Philomena. I like that name.
Yeah, and I saw a picture of her. She actually looked very severe, the picture and I used to be scared of it when I was a kid, but mom assures me that she was a wonderful lady.
That's
It's just what she looked like. Okay, the next letter is from Uncle Cesare, and that is dated January 27th, 1970. Dearest cousin, Sylvia, my dear, as soon as we received this important and great letter, I quickly answered, hoping that you are still with good health, of which I can assure you of me and my family. Dearest cousin, to tell you how very, very happy to hear from you. For certain, it was a joyous occasion that only you and all of us can know. After all these years, not knowing anything of your existence brought a lot of hurt, having always many thoughts of that torment, like a sore that never healed, and that today you have helped to heal. Dearest, now we know very little, but for the moment it will do. By being happy and satisfied, soon we will find out more about one another. Now I will tell you a little about all of us, even though many years have passed without knowing anything. Since the war, we haven't heard a thing from you and yours. The way I remember and the way your mother related it to you hasn't changed one bit. My brothers are 3, my sisters 2. My brothers Joseph, Cesare, and Consalvo is in Argentina now. My sisters Maria and Filomena. We would be so happy if our grandfather was alive to hear that we are corresponding. He died in 1947 at the age of 86 years. So I believe this is Cesare's son that's writing this.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. Today, it would be impossible to have him living, which means he's just too old. There are so many things to relate, but there is no paper large enough, but little at a time. When we write, we will be able to tell each other all there is to know. For this important moment, your correspondence assures me that you exist. We have always prayed that we would find each other someday, and now it has happened. This is the family of Cesare who is writing. It is composed as follows. Cesare, his wife, Saria, 3 children, 2 boys, Salvatore and Alvaro. The girls, Severino, married with 2 children, her husband, Domenico. This is our family. Dearest Sylvia, I am Salvatore, the oldest son of Cesare, who is writing this letter, and I assure you, I have a desire to see you one day. I'd give anything to get to know you and spend some time with all, but maybe that is impossible. Now I close with live sentiment and kisses and affectionate salutations for the joy we have received in hearing from you after all these years. You have given us great happiness. Again, I say affectionately so long, and I am waiting for a prompt reply. Affectionately, cousin and uncle and family, Uncle Cesare. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I love the bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, and so the last letter I have to share is from Uncle Giuseppe. And this was dated February 6, 1970. Dearest niece, you could never imagine the joy we received that you gave us. Do you realize that 45 years have passed without word from you all? More than ever, I want to thank you for your kind thoughts about us. You can't imagine how we have always thought about you all, but to find your address was simply impossible. But with the grace of God, we have the fortune now of being able to exchange letters back and forth frequently, we hope. Regarding our situation here in Italy, our health is very good. We are 2 brothers and 2 sisters and 10 children, and many nephews and nieces. They ask frequently about you all. Another brother who is now in Argentina. It gave us great source of satisfaction in seeing the pictures. In fact, one of them resembles one of my sons. But above all, I would love to see you. But I am 70 years old and cannot travel. So therefore, would be grateful to see you in person in Italy someday to visit with one another. Would be my joy and the rest of my family. I have so much to say and ask you. I'll close and I assure that we are all well and hope the same from you all. With all my heart, I send affectionate salutations apart from my wife and my children, Piero, Lucretia, and Bruno. Also from our other relatives, we embrace you affectionately, your uncle Giuseppe Nicolai.
That was awesome. So those letters, the kisses, the bye-byes, the happiness, the joy, the connection was instant. And the families from both sides of the Atlantic have been waiting for this for a long time. The splintered family on opposite sides of the Atlantic were yearning to find out what had happened to those on the other side. The joy, the love, and the relief in these letters is undeniable. So what happens next? What are we going to do next? You'll have to come back next week. You'll see what happens when you start looking. So, tutte la strada portano a Roma. I don't know if I said that right. How'd you like it? Do I need more wine?
A little bit more wine.
Some wine.
What I need is some wine. Well, you know what wine I'm talking about, Lisa.
I do.
The best wine. And it just means all roads lead to Rome.
So Kim and I want to thank our special guest, Lisa, for helping us to tell her family story. And it's such a compelling one. I personally can't wait to hear more.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed this and I would be glad to come back and talk some more. So I do have a little bit more family history.
Yeah. There's a lot to cover, but this story's not over. And we want to give a special thanks to those who are listening, like David.
Hi, David.
Hi, David. And if you can, please take a minute to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast. Remember, you can drop us a line at chasinghazelstales@gmail.com, or you can look for us on social media. We put up some really great pictures of the Nicolai family this past week. So keep looking because this is going to get good. We're going to say goodbye like the Italians, and we're going to say bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.